Ned was browsing through his copy of the Times newspaper one morning when he saw with the shock of arrest that Sybil Rorke had gone missing. The well-known and dazzling figure, the 32-year-old widow of the late Sir Ernest Rorke, had disappeared from a rented house in Torquay. It was announced that an investigation was now underway as to her whereabouts. Ned was glad to have seen the article before the arrival of his distant cousin Archie Rorke, also successor to Sir Ernest's estates and title, to spend a few country days with him. How the mysterious affair would affect him, Ned had no idea. Also a close friend, Archie himself had become engaged to Sybil after his cousin Ernest's demise, and Ned was to have been best man at their wedding. Within a fortnight of the date fixed for the nuptials, it had, however, been announced that the marriage would not take place, and Archie had never explained why. Lady Rorke had, in the meantime, cut herself off from her numerous friends and lived in solitude in Torquay, from where she had now vanished. With the prospect of seeing Archie that evening, Ned's thoughts were of Lady Rorke, remembering her vibrant presence and infectious laughter. But he had glimpsed a dark side at their first meeting, which was just before the loss of her first husband. A thrush had dashed itself against a window and lay fluttering on the ground at their feet. Sybil was instantly all pity and tenderness, picking up the bird and finding its wing broken. Ned had suggested putting the bird out of its pain, but Sybil wanted to take it home. With a strange smile, she watched as the poor creature struggled feebly in her hands, finally expiring. Sybil tossed it away with a little shrug of her shoulders, calling it silly to have flown against the glass, and suggesting another dance inside at the social gathering. Ned hoped that he had mistaken the secret glee with which she had observed the suffering bird, until another incident confirmed his impression. He was at an overdue visit to the dentist, and in the waiting room was a girl of about 12, her hand on her cheek, and stifling sobs of pain or apprehension. He was wondering if he could comfort or distract the girl, when who should come in the door but Lady Rorke. She laughed delightedly when she saw Ned, then her glance fell on the forlorn figure of the child. She offered to accompany her into the surgery, and the girl gave a faint smile. She said, "Yes, please," and her tooth had to come out, but she was unable to tolerate gas, the anaesthesia. The same gleam of a smile appeared on Sybil's face, but a light not of pity. As if trying to comfort the girl, she began to describe the procedure, scanning her terrified face as her wailing resumed. Despite all of Sybil's wonderful attributes, including a reputed gift as a spiritual medium, Ned began finding this aspect of her persona quite sinister. He reflected that she had also treated Archie with some cruelty. He had always been besotted with her, even before the death of her husband, and she seemed to have enjoyed his crazed suffering. The following spring, Ned was staying as a guest with Sybil and her husband Sir Ernest Rorke, who was looking ill and quietly brooding. At one stage, Sir Ernest asked a servant if anything had been heard of a missing child, and Ned noticed a shadow of suspense or anxiety across Sybil's face when he was answered in the negative. She asked Ned if he would walk in the woods with her until the other guests arrived. As they walked amongst blossom and daffodils, she explained her husband's concern. 2 days ago, a small girl called Ellen Davenport had brought a note from the village up to their house, and Sybil had been out, so the girl had left the note and started for home. She had not been seen since, with still no news, despite searches for miles around. Sybil had visited her grieving mother the day before, who said she was trusting in God's will if Ellen be found alive. Passing along the one road of the red-tiled village, Sybil pointed out Ellen's house. Then she and Ned turned homewards, joining the road again at the bottom of the great lake, below the terraced gardens of the Rorke estate. The lake was artificial, some 4 fathoms deep, with its overflow pouring through sluices edged by reinforced concrete. 1 month later, Sir Ernest died, and Ned learnt that Sybil had never left him. She had been present at his wound dressings following the fruitless surgery, and even slept on the sofa beside him, despite the presence of 2 trained nurses. Archie Rorke arrived at Ned's house for his visit, and he immediately commented on Lady Rorke's disappearance, after which he wanted to explain to Ned about the breaking off of their engagement. He had told no one else up until then. Archie seemed quite emotional and said that he had to tell someone. 2 weeks before his planned marriage to Sybil, he had gone to the Rorke house to check some redecorating he had arranged. Water from the dam had flooded the road leading to the village and caused a great crack in the concrete. This threatened to release the lake water and cause no end of damage. He had worked for 2 days to siphon off the water so as to mend the crack, and was just about to leave for town when his foreman reported that they had found something in the ooze and mud at the bottom of the dam, the body of a young girl. In the telling, Archie became tense, while Ned was horribly aware of what he was going to say. Archie said that the disappearance of Ellen Davenport was now explained, her identity established by a chain of beads around her neck and fragments of clothing. He had returned to town after the inquest, but had not told Sybil, as she was quite superstitious and would see it as ill-omened before their wedding. Archie then spoke of Sybil's extraordinary mediumistic powers. She had once told him very private details about his own mother, whom she had never met, and which were later confirmed by his mother's friend. She could also perform materializations and sometimes regain consciousness from her trance and be aware of the communications while they were happening. On the night of his return to London, Sybil and Archie had dined alone, and he had a strong desire that she hold a sitting for just the 2 of them, to which she agreed. They sat in lamplight by a small table, and Sybil quickly went into a trance, her head falling forward and her breathing slow. They sat for a long time in silence, Archie explained, as his hands started to tremble. He was barely able to speak, as he then described a mist forming above the table. Slightly luminous, it spread upwards and moulded itself into human shape, soon rising waist-high above the table and features starting to outline. After some fluid swaying, the form solidified into the half-figure of a young girl. Her eyes slowly opened, and then Archie had noticed around her neck a chain of beads, those he had seen by the body in the lake. Archie asked the girl who she was, although he already knew, and her whispered reply confirmed it. Ellen Davenport. Archie was seized by a disordered terror, regretting his request for the séance, and thankful that Sybil's trance made her unconscious to the little white figure with its wide-gazing eyes. Then he heard a stir of movement from the chair where she sat, and saw that she had raised her head. Sybil's eyes were open, and on her face a mask of terror and recognition. He could see that Sybil knew who the phantom was. Ellen's spectre turned towards Sybil, and her whisper became louder. "You could have saved me," she said. "You might have tried, but you watched me struggling till I sank." Then the apparition vanished. Archie turned on the light, aware that something within him had gone cold. Sybil sat looking blankly in front of her, offering no word of denial in answer to the terrible accusation. She soon rose and left the room, and Archie let himself out of the house. Despite his adoration of Sybil, he never attempted to see her again, and she did not attempt to see him. That pale little figure would have always been with them, for Sybil could not deny the reality of the truth it had spoken. As to the investigation into Sybil's disappearance, Sometime later, the authorities informed the Rorkes that she had been located in a remote Buddhist temple in Tibet. They reported her as saying that her remorse had become unbearable and she was now engrossed in her own spiritual path. She had no intention of returning. She sought not just knowledge, but atonement.